Welcome to today's session. My name is Hilary Kiboro. I'm Deputy Head of Delegation and Legal Advisor to the International Committee of the Red Cross to the African Union. It's a great pleasure to have you this morning, and welcome to the participants joining us virtually. We are looking forward to having a very great discussion on a subject which is also rather grave, international humanitarian law. And we want to see how international humanitarian law can contribute to peace. For a long time, international humanitarian law, as you will know, is the law, otherwise known as the law of armed conflict. It is a law that regulates two key things. It's the behavior of people fighting in armed conflict, in the sense of how people are treated, people who are not taking a direct part in hostilities, as well as people who have stopped taking a direct part in hostilities. This law also prescribes means and methods of warfare. It describes weapons that can be used, how they can be used, and weapons that cannot be used, in a sense to ensure a modicum of dignity and protect basic guarantees in an armed conflict. And for a long time, IHL has been seen to be separate from peace process. How you build peace processes and how you regulate conduct of hostilities or fighting has seen to be different. But more and more, we are seeing correlations, and it's important to draw these connections between how international humanitarian law is implemented and eventual building of peace. And there are many ways, and this is what we want to look at today, to unpack how can international humanitarian law contribute to sustainable peace. And I'll give one example. For instance, how IHL is waged. If IHL is respected, civilian infrastructure will be spared, civilian lives will be spared. And that creates a condition that will enable warring parties, to come together better. And it will also ensure that the cost of rebuilding, the cost of reconstruction after the conflict is done, is much lower than otherwise it would be. We also talk about IHL contributing to something very critical in post-conflict reconstruction, addressing the question of missing persons, which is always a big issue, which is not always, again, addressed. And IHL has obligations to ensure that missing persons, the question of missing persons, is addressed. And when that question of missing persons is addressed, it creates a path for long-term reconciliation between societies. Otherwise, if societies are left when people don't know the fate of their loved ones, it creates an animosity that can create cycles of violence. And these are just a few ways in which IHL can contribute to peace. So we have a powerful panel that will be helping me to unpack some of these things. And we also have a keynote speaker from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, who will give us Ethiopia's experience in IHL and in peace building, in trust building, in using IHL as a tool for trust building. So I want you to join hands together as we welcome Magdalawit Taye, and she tells me that I pronounce her name properly, so I'm very proud of myself. She's the Director of Human Rights Department, International Law Directorate, of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia. Welcome, Madam, to give us your keynote speech. Please put our hands together as we welcome Magdalawit. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Kiboro. It's my honor to address this distinguished gathering today. And on behalf of the government of Ethiopia, I appreciate all those who have contributed to this important platform for dialogue and reflection. Ethiopia stands as a firm believer in the foundational role of international humanitarian law in preserving human dignity and ensuring lasting peace. As a party to numerous international treaties, including the Geneva Conventions, Ethiopia has taken decisive steps to domesticate these obligations into national law, which includes comprehensive domestic legislation to protect combatants and civilians during non-international armed conflict. Our defense forces are trained in international humanitarian law and fully aware of their responsibilities during hostilities and law enforcement operations. Violations of international humanitarian law are subjected to investigation and prosecution under the military justice system, ensuring that perpetrators are held accountable for their actions. In this regard, the government of Ethiopia reaffirms its unwavering commitment to full compliance with international humanitarian law. We assert that any misconduct during conflict will be thoroughly investigated and appropriate legal measures will be taken. Our recent history speaks to this commitment. During and following the conflict in the northern part of our country, Ethiopia abided by the rules of international humanitarian law. From the very onset, even before the conflict erupted, the government remained transparent and steadfast in its resolve to settle difference through peaceful means. This unwavering commitment ultimately culminated in the signing of the Pretoria Agreement, a landmark step towards ending hostilities and building peace. The Pretoria Cessation of Hostilities Agreement has proven effective in halting 2 years of war. Since the signing, the government has taken significant steps on the road to recovery, beginning with the immediate cessation of hostilities, the disarmament and handover of heavy weapons, and the implementation of transitional measures aimed at restoring constitutional order. We have seen encouraging progress. The resumption of essential services, the reopening of schools and economic activities in the Tigray region, the formation of the interim regional administration, and the establishment of the National Rehabilitation Commission are important, tangible outcomes marking our collective effort towards peace. Humanitarian response has been another pillar of our post-conflict commitment. The government has acted promptly to provide life-saving assistance to internally displaced persons, ensuring access to emergency support and laying the groundwork for long-term solution. In 2021, Ethiopia ratified the Kampala Convention, and a draft national law to implement its provision is now underway. Though challenges remain, we are fully dedicated to finding durable solutions that enable safe return and reintegration of IDPs into society. We also recognize that the reintegration of former combatants is critical for national stability and the economic recovery of conflict-affected regions. Despite financial constraints, Ethiopia has launched programs focused on disarmament, demobilization and reintegration, and continues to restore public service and rebuild essential infrastructures. Distinguished participants, we are deeply grateful for the continued support of our partners and the international community in implementing the Pretoria Agreement. At this juncture, we call upon our partners and allies to maximize their support for Ethiopia's DDR and peace-building initiatives. The path to sustainable peace is one we must walk together with collaboration and shared responsibilities. Ethiopia also remains committed to advancing justice and reconciliation, not just as a process, but as a national purpose. We have adopted a comprehensive transitional justice policy through an inclusive, participatory, and credible approach. This policy is designed to address conflict-related grievances, heal the wounds of the past, rebuild trust among communities, and prevent recurrence of violences. In line with this, we are currently finalizing the legal and institutional frameworks necessary for implementation. Draft proclamations, including the International Crimes Proclamation and Truth Finding and Reconciliation Proclamation, have been prepared in harmony with international legal standards, addressing gaps in our current legal system and providing the tools to deliver justice for victims of war crimes and other grave violence. Ethiopia is also making meaningful progress in its national dialogue, an inclusive platform designed to foster national consensus and unity. This dialogue seeks to address root causes of discord and create a shared vision for our future. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we recognize that post-conflict recovery is a long and complex journey, but the government of Ethiopia is fully committed to addressing the challenges that lies ahead. We are actively engaging with stakeholders to ensure the smooth and faithful implementation of Pretoria Agreement and the broader peace process. We believe that respect for international humanitarian law is essential, not only to uphold the rule of law, but to strengthen democratic governance and build resilient societies. To conclude, Ethiopia reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the principles of international humanitarian law, to the pursuit of justice, the promotion of peace, and the preservation of our shared humanity. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Mektelawit, for that very rich speech on Ethiopia's experience when it comes to using IHL as a tool for peace building. And you mentioned quite a number of things that I think resonate well with our next speaker, including disarmament and just basically building the national capacity of the country to respond, to manage conflict better using IHL mechanisms. So thank you very much. And that connects us very well with our next speaker, who I want to introduce now. And she's joining us virtually. This is Audrey Purcell. She's an ICSC legal advisor leading a project, and I know she will talk about it more, on a global initiative on this very subject, on IHL and peace. So we really have the right person to speak to us about how IHL can contribute to peace. Just to say a few words about Audrey, and I hope she's online, Audrey. Audrey is an ICSC legal advisor since 2011, and she's held many diverse roles, including protection delegate, sexual and urban violence delegate, restoring family links. As she has also served as an armed violence coordinator for the Americas and operations coordinator for Brazil, and many other positions. She's currently leading a work stream known as IHL and Peace as part of a global initiative initiated by 6 states together with the ICRC to try and rally support for international humanitarian law. So now let me welcome Audrey to just give us an overview of when we say IHL and peace, what does it exactly mean? I hit onto it, but I want Audrey to unpack for us a little bit more on what exactly IHL and peace means and how IHL can actually create pathways to sustainable peace. So, Audrey, if you can hear me, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hilary. Can you hear me? Perfect. Good morning to all excellencies, distinguished panelists, colleagues. It's really an honor for me to speak with you today on a subject that lies at the heart of both humanitarian action, but also peace building, which is the role of international humanitarian law in advancing sustainable peace. In today's world, arms conflicts are more fragmented, they're more protracted and complex than ever before. The International Committee of the Red Cross currently tracks a number of armed conflicts to over 120, many of which unfortunately have persisted for decades. They are not just geopolitical crises, they are human tragedies. Civilians, and particularly children, bear the brunt of war's consequences. Entire communities are displaced, infrastructure is obliterated, and generations grow up knowing nothing but violence. So in this reality, respect for international humanitarian law is not merely a legal obligation, it is a crucial instrument for limiting suffering and preserving pathways to peace, as was mentioned by my colleague. And too often we hear the argument that IHL is an impediment to military operation or that compliance is unrealistic in modern warfare. But let us be clear, violations of IHL do not bring conflicts to a swifter, more permanent end. On the contrary, they deepen grievances, fuel cycles of violence, and hinder post-conflict recovery. And then conversely, when warring parties respect fundamental principles and when they distinguish between civilians and combatants, when they allow humanitarian access or when they abide by detention protections, they are not just upholding the law, they are removing unnecessary obstacles and fostering the conditions necessary for eventual peace. But there is also another equally important way in which IHL can support conditions conducive to peace. And it's this dynamic that I would really like to focus on today. And that's the role of IHL as a gateway to dialogue. So IHL offers a rare neutral entry point for engagement, even amid intense hostilities. And when parties to a conflict come together to discuss humanitarian issues, whether it's to allow aid delivery or to evacuate civilians or to share information on the missing, or even to negotiate temporary ceasefire, they create a space for communication that can plant the seeds of trust. And these small, often technical interactions can gradually evolve into broader conversations, offering fragile but real bridges towards more enduring peace efforts. And we've actually seen this dynamic in practice in different contexts that we cover. So for example, in Colombia, the systematic use of IHL in humanitarian negotiation helped secure the release of detainees, but also reduce violence and lay critical groundwork for eventual peace talks. In Syria as well, localized humanitarian pause, albeit fragile, enabled essential civilian evacuations and open spaces for broader ceasefire discussion. And another example, of course, is in many contexts addressing the issue of the missing, which has served not only as a humanitarian imperative, but also a confidence building function between parties in conflict. So this approach that I've just highlighted really underpins the ICRC's global initiative to galvanize political commitment to IHL, which was launched last year on the 27th of December, alongside Brazil, China, France, Jordan, Kazakhstan, and South Africa. And a central component of this initiative is the IHL and Peace Workstream, which I have the privilege of leading. The idea of this workstream is really to explore how IHL contributes to peace, not just as a legal doctrine, but as a practical operational tool for preventing escalation, promoting reconciliation, and fostering sustainable conflict resolution. It's currently co-chaired by Colombia, Saudi Arabia, and Ethiopia. And we hope to address three critical thematics in 2025. The first one is mediation and IHL, really exploring how the respect for IHL enhances mediation efforts, facilitates ceasefires, and builds trust by ensuring humanitarian access and protection for affected population. The second will be disarmament and IHL, where we will assess how arms control and disarmament efforts linked to IHL serve as a confidence building measures that reduces the risk of relapse into violence. And finally, we will address the role of IHL in post-conflict transitions, examining how IHL obligations that perdure post-conflict around the treatment of detainees, the clarification of the fate of the missing, and protection of civilians can support long-term stability. The idea is for each of these thematics to be guided by a series of state consultation throughout the year. And the first begins this month, focusing on IHL and mediation, and includes two side events. The first one is a side event that will actually take place today here in the same studio in Geneva on the missing and mediation, and it will be a high-level expert panel that will deep dive into how addressing missing persons issues can foster trust, and support reconciliation. The second event will take place in Doha on the 30th of April. It will be on leveraging IHL for effective mediation and sustainable peace. And it's a state closed-door roundtable to exchange on good practices on how to integrate IHL into mediation processes, and of course, addressing challenges as well. These discussions will then culminate in an all-state online consultation on May 26th, where states will be invited to reaffirm their commitment to this agenda and really help shape a practical way forward. So the conversation, of course, around IHL and peace will then continue for the rest of 2025 with different thematics and then into 2026. And we really hope to include events on the African continent to ensure regional perspectives are at the forefront. Colleagues, if you allow me, maybe to close, sustainable peace cannot be built on impunity, unchecked violence, or the erosion of humanitarian principles. But equally, peace processes do not emerge from nowhere. They require trust, they require communication, and shared space. And IHL creates that space. So when parties respect IHL, they lay down a thread of dialogue, however thin, that can over time be woven into the fabric of peace. With this, I conclude, and I really look forward to collaborating with you all to translate these commitments into action. And let us ensure that IHL is not just a legal framework, but a compass guiding us towards sustainable peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. A round of applause. Thank you so much, Audrey, for unpacking the concept of IHL and peace, and you've really delved into how IHL goes into that, including as a tool for de-escalation and preventing escalation. And we can see that every day that when IHL is implemented faithfully, the risk of escalation of conflict then becomes lower and lower. So thank you, and I hope you stay with us for our Q&A at the end of the session. So I want to now come back to the room, and I want us to hear from a colleague who is also ICRC, but also wears another hat, Tofik Naili, who is a senior curriculum advisor and the head of transversal operations at the Center of Competence on Humanitarian Negotiations. And I want Tofik to tell us how humanitarian negotiations can enhance protection of civilians as part of peace building. So, Tofik, over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Hilary, for the introduction and for the framing of that session. I would like to thank you very much for giving an opportunity to bring this practical approach to humanitarian action, which is the humanitarian negotiation, which is an important element that even Audrey has been highlighting several times during her intervention. So thank you very much for that. It's very appreciated. And so as Hilary has said, I'm in charge of the transversal operation at the Center of Competence on Humanitarian Negotiation. And the Center of Competence on Humanitarian Negotiation is the result of an initiative that started in 2016 out of the initiative of the ICRC, the WFP, UNHCR, and MSF, the 4 organizations that have been supporting that initiative, and several states also that have been supporting as well this, the activities of CCHN, as notably the Swiss government as well, that has been behind our different activities as well. So CCHN's objective was to provide a set of tools to humanitarian actors in the field of humanitarian negotiation. So to engage with what we call frontliners, so those who are really at the front line and interacting or engaging daily with either armed actors, non-state armed actors, political figures, etc., to ensure secure access and secure activities of protection in the field and concrete activities. So in a way, what I'm going to do with you in this session is a bit to zoom in on how humanitarian negotiation can be very practical in what they bring in the humanitarian environment. So we talked at the beginning about how IHL contributes to peace building. What I'm going to do is to talk about how humanitarian negotiation contribute to IHL compliance, to contribute to peace building in a way. So we zoom in into this. So the first point I would like to raise here is that negotiation is a practical bridge to IHL compliance. And I think it's an important thing. It's not something that is completely the opposite of what IHL and how we would use IHL in the field. But it's often something controversial in the way when we asked in 2014 to humanitarian actors, how do you negotiate? Most of the time they were answering, we never negotiate. We have IHL, we have international law, principles, humanitarian principles, so why should we negotiate? But in reality, we daily negotiate with armed actors, with authorities, and etc. So I think it's an important thing, and negotiation is here to support that initiative of IHL and how to make IHL and legal norms more acceptable by authorities in this sense. So today, negotiation is one of a few tools humanitarian actors have among advocacy and humanitarian diplomacy in order to translate the principles of IHL into practical outcomes for civilian protection. So what we always try to bring in this aspect of negotiation for protection, for IHL, is really to think about this pragmatic approach. And discussing as well with people acting on the ground, when we discuss about protection activities, we talk about advocacy. Negotiation is also here to support advocacy, to bring pragmatic approach to the activities we bring. IHL sets a normative framework, but negotiation is how we engage parties to find concrete solutions to protection problems. So if we are not ready to explore, to be creative in our engagement with authorities, probably we won't find solution in this sense. And IHL will be, if I quote again Audrey, is our compass in a way. And when we engage in negotiation to secure an access, to obtain protection outcomes, the compass of IHL is always around here for us to guide us into this. So at CCHN, we have learned from hundreds of frontline practitioners since 2016. Today, we have counted more than 8,000 community members that have joined our workshop and have attended or have learned our methodology to be able to interact on the ground. And this allows it allows for humanitarian objective to be pursued even in an environment with deep mistrust and legal doubts as well. So what our community has brought as well from the field is that a lot of different challenges, very interesting challenges towards the legal framework of the IHL. The first point I would like to raise is the legal fatigue or the what we call the resistance from authorities. So sometimes imposing legal frameworks that are international, but sometimes perceived by local actors as coming from the global north or coming from the west, it's even more difficult to make them engage into this and understand what we try to reach in terms of objective through IHL. So in a way, this legal fatigue can create a problem, and if we don't anchor it in the values that resonate locally. So it's very important that everything we engage for negotiation, etc., we consider local values, local ways of thinking and working on the ground. Another interesting challenge was the balance between military logic and humanitarian imperative. So in negotiation, we always teach that we need to find a kind of empathetic position, so to engage in empathy. So if we want people to listen to us, if we want armed actors to listen to us as well, when we are here to advocate for IHL and to try to negotiate protection for civilians, I think we need to put ourselves in the shoes as well and understand their military logic. And how can we find, bridges or common shared space between us and the interlocutors we are dealing with that have military objectives that are very heavy on their daily activities in this sense. Another challenge was engaging with armed groups and de facto authorities. Many lack legal literacy, so difficult to bring this IHL as well. So for negotiation, for bringing practical problems and finding practical solutions together between the humanitarian actors and the interlocutors is also an opportunity to make IHL more how to say, more readable, more acceptable to these interlocutors we're dealing with. So we need to ground it in their own logic as well, in their identity, in their moral frameworks. Another challenge that came out as well was operational barriers. So, for example, sanction regimes are also difficult for our engagement with actors. Bureaucratic impediments is also another element. And sometimes counterterrorism restriction that does not allow us to engage with some authorities. I have done a series of workshops across the globe where humanitarian actors, some were saying we're not allowed to engage with these armed actors, and some of us were saying, yes, we are allowed. In a way, there's different perspective in this, but the fact of some international agreement or law are preventing this is also another challenge that that is brought to the humanitarian negotiation to find better outcomes for the vulnerable population. So in terms of adaptive strategies, what can we do with all these different challenges? I think what is important is to use IHL as a shared language, as a weapon in a sense, if I may say this. IHL can be a useful starting point, but rigid legal arguments often alienate our engagement. So we need again to find a way to put it forward to our interlocutors, to frame our IHL principles in ways that align with their shared values and mutual interests. And so it's often about using the word we. How can we find a solution to a problem in line with the humanitarian principles, in line with IHL, to be able to move forward for our actors? An important one. So it's about starting from shared values again. So to be able to have shared values and to identify a common shared space with our interlocutors is to know what are their values. So again, I talked earlier about empathy. How can we put ourselves in their shoes? How can we move towards understanding further their logic? Listening to them is an important one. Active listening is another important aspect of that provides us a secure negotiation that would feed in this compliance of IHL as well. Another example we've looked at, so for instance in the Sahel, resorting to religious local values rather than grounding the conversation on IHL sometimes can open many doors. So instead of coming with a very rigid approach with legal frameworks, Islamic law as well can help in engaging with some interlocutors to build that common space with them. So again, I might be repeating, engaging local norms and tradition is also an important aspect. So we know that in Africa there's a very big heritage of dialogue, of mediation, and I think our colleague from the university will talk about these customs. They are also very important as well, and we as CCHN have been engaged in listening also different actors, not only humanitarian actors, communities, elders, local leaders, to listen and to learn from this and to see how we can bring that back to humanitarian actors and use this as leverage for a better dialogue with the interlocutors. We have a past experience we have had with the University of Oman, with the Sultan Qaboos University, to explore aspects of mediation among communities, among tradition among communities, to bring it back to the community of humanitarian actors at CCHN and give them more tools to engage in that negotiation aspect. One last point I would like to bring is, before concluding, is it's about building trust. So IHL is also about building trust with our interlocutors. Negotiation is about building trust with our interlocutors. We're not engaging in negotiation like we would engage with a car dealer. Dealing with political figures, military figures is very important for us to build a sustainable relationship. So the more we engage with them, the more we are securing our activities and protecting civilian population by having this trust or mutual trust that we have together in this. I mean, just to conclude, I would like, I still have time, huh? Yeah, I just conclude. So my closing reflection for today would be negotiation help bridge the gap between normative frameworks like IHL and the realities to conflict. It's really about being grassrooted, grounded in the field and understanding the different dynamics on the ground. It's about making protection tangible in difficult environments. While the road is challenging, we've seen again and again that with creativity, local grounding, and sustained engagement, protection outcomes are possible even with the most resistant interlocutors. So there are always ways. Engaging with gangs, with criminal gangs as well in our humanitarian activities is also, there are also common values we can find if we make that effort, if we try to find creative solution to build that bridge with its different or resistant counterparts. And to finish, at CCHN, we remain committed to learning from and with a broader humanitarian community in Addis or in Africa and across the globe. So we'll be happy to answer any question and to engage with more conversation around our activities. I've left a few brochures outside, but I think they're all gone. So check our website to learn more of what we do. Thank you very much, Hilary. Thank you very much for your invitation.
Thank you. A round of applause, please. Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, Tofik, for unpacking that concept of negotiation as a tool for trust building. And as you said, it is important to link some of the things, the values in IHL with local customs, with what people can identify with what societies can identify with. And once you do this, then you create a very powerful tool to be able to bridge the gap that exists. And that brings me very nicely to our next panelist, who is Joshua, to talk about exactly this. So how can humanitarian actors actually, negotiate and contribute to IHL building? Joshua, I want to engage you in a few questions to just unpack this question of humanitarian actors and their role in peace building and how they can use negotiations and whatever other tools they have to of course advocate for better implementation of IHL, eventually creating peace. And Joshua, to just say a few words about Joshua, is that he's a regional legal advisor for East and Central Africa at Daikoni International Humanitarian Law Center, based in Nairobi, Kenya. And is involved in a multi-year project to enhance IHL capacity in several African countries, including Mozambique, Ethiopia, DRC, Sudan, and South Sudan. And he's engaged very closely with humanitarian actors. So thank you, Joshua, for gracing our panel. And the first question that I want to ask you, from your experience working in the region, how do you see humanitarian actors contributing to basically implementation of IHL during active armed conflicts?
Thank you very much. So I think it's interesting to start, I think, from something that was mentioned both by our ICRC colleague about the importance of looking at IHL not just as a legal framework, but something that can be operationally usable, that can actually demonstrate some actual real life impact on the ground. And I think that's been one of the challenges working within this space as a legal advisor, is that you have to constantly find a way in which you link this honestly very sophisticated legal framework with what is happening on the ground. And so part of it in working with humanitarian actors is trying to, first of all, in a sense, diffuse this very, complicated, rather complex legal framework into something that, they can, take to the field and actually put in application. And so that's been one of the big challenges for us at the IHL Center in working with humanitarian actors in translating IHL. And I think that's one of the areas that we have sought to continue to build our efforts, because we see that humanitarian actors are key partners in three areas particularly. One, they're very instrumental in the area of civilian protection. And we've seen that especially in areas where humanitarian actors work hand in hand with local actors. So you're looking probably at international NGOs, you're looking at local NGOs. We've seen how in working together they're able to push forward the agenda for civilian protection. Sometimes it is through robust advocacy on a number of these issues. Sometimes it's through, as we've been listening, active engagement with armed actors. And so part of our role as the IHL Center is to give them the tools, and this is really IHL tools, so that when they walk into the room, they have what they need in order to engage in this very critical area. The other, I could say, the other two areas we could quickly summarize is we've seen that they're very key, of course, in the area of humanitarian access. And I think that has been one of the big challenges in the region that I have been operating in. There have been challenges for a lot of humanitarian actors to actually get to areas either without being attacked or without being subject to, their vehicles being commandeered. And so it is beginning to work with them around, first of all, what is the framework you're working with around protection of your activities, and then how do you engage with different actors about these legal norms. The last one is around, and that's one area that we are actively working on right now, developing what we're calling the Stockholm Monitoring Manual. There's nothing special. I mean, Stockholm is a special place, but it's called Stockholm because, of course, the organization is Swedish. But it's developing a series of guidelines to help humanitarian actors, even as they engage with different situations of armed conflict, what is a violation? What is, what does it mean to be, what does, for example, starvation of civilians mean? Because you have humanitarian actors sometimes making certain claims, and when you push them further, you begin to realize, there's some things missing. So we're beginning to work with them to build guidelines so that they are a lot more, robust and a lot more concrete in their monitoring processes of different armed conflict situations.
Thank you, Joshua, for unpacking that. And I want you to just take it a little bit further and expound a little bit. So when you talk of IHL, you have the IHL norms, of course, which you said can be very sophisticated set of norms, but you also need to ground that in reality. You need to ground that in relevant interventions. And obviously, I imagine that there's a gap between the legal norms and how then you bring this to the ground and ensure that the interventions, the norms that are inherent in the law are translated practically in a way that helps people and that builds peace. So how do you see this challenge? How do you bridge that gap?
I think the first place, and I think for us at the IHL Center, has been to maintain proximity with the situations, to maintain, not to be detached from the context that we are operating in. And I think one of the things that has been helpful for us is continued engagement with the practitioners on the ground. So as he said, the people at the front line of humanitarian engagement are really, the soldiers in this fight, in a sense, from the perspective of humanitarian actors. And so one of the challenges, I think, sometimes about and I'm being kind of introspective here, is that as legal practitioners, we are somehow removed from these contexts. And as a center, we're primarily composed of legal practitioners. And one of the key things has been, how do you maintain proximity with the context so that you understand the real issues? So that even as you provide legal support, it's legal support that doesn't just float on the surface, but actually speaks to the issues on the ground. So we do that through, regular interactions with partners on the ground, whether it's through meetings, whether it's through attending the briefings that they hold, whether it's through what I'm engaged in right now, of course, after I leave this meeting, through field visits and field missions, interacting directly both with the people in the community and also with the humanitarian actors that they work with. And so that has enabled us to, in a sense, tailor responses, very sophisticated IHL responses to speak to the particular issues that that the humanitarian actors are grappling with. I think the other has been supporting localized initiatives. We've seen a number of interesting local initiatives. In Sudan, for example, where I operate, we have seen some interesting initiatives around emergency rooms, and some of us might know about these spontaneous civilian initiatives to address issues around, shortages of medical assistance. And, we have been providing legal support for some of the actors who've been engaging in this space. So how do we not just, try to prompt, particular actors to do something, but what are they actually doing, and how are you able to allow them to see how this actually has a space in IHL and what they're doing actually is protected within the legal framework? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I just want to ask you one last question. You said that DICONI tries to build proximity with local actors. And I just want you to unpack unpack that a little bit further and tell us about the role that you see for local actors at the grassroots level in IHL implementation and in promoting peace, and how you actually support them to do this. And I want to tie that also with our next panelist, who is going to be talking about local customs, because the two can be seen quite together. So what do you see as the role of local actors at that grassroots level to promote IHL, to promote peace, and link the two, and how you support them?
Yes, so the interesting thing about humanitarian actors is that, especially when we look at local actors, so in a sense we make the distinction between, international actors who come into a context, and then those that they find in the context who are already grappling with a lot of these issues. And so we seek to work with these different categories of persons. And so for the local actors, for the most part, the reality is this is part of their general lifestyle. This is part of who they are. They are part and parcel of these communities. And so understanding that that is their, in a sense, that is their place in these communities is very important, because even as they begin to engage in civilian protection, humanitarian assistance, monitoring of IHL, whether it's IHL compliance, this is part of a continuum of activities that will continue even after armed conflict. And so it's important to realize that local actors will be there both in and out, and perhaps back in, as we hopefully are not going to see in South Sudan, of armed conflict, this continuum of armed conflict. So recognizing that they are there throughout is very important, because they will be there in pushing the IHL agenda. They'll also be there at the other side of it, using the same gains from the context of armed conflict to now push for sustainable peace. So it's, in a sense, understanding their critical role. And for us, one of those two categories that have been very important, one is, as we have been hearing, local leaders, community leaders. They're a big part of not just engagement with armed actors or engagement with engagement for humanitarian assistance, but they're also critical in terms of peace building. And so they move from engagement into peace building. And so these are critical actors for that, community actors. The other is religious actors, religious leaders. And we have begun an initiative, particularly in Mozambique, to begin to engage with religious actors in peace building. And it's interesting, in that context, they already have spontaneous initiatives. They have what they call peace clubs. These are spontaneous initiatives where religious leaders, and these are interfaith leaders, are beginning to engage with peace building, understanding, some of the conflict dynamics, and using that to be able to foster sustainable peace. So I think it's important to understand how they are part of the war, but they're also very much part of the solution at the end, because this is their community and this is their society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joshua. A round of applause for Joshua, please. Thank you so much. What you've spoken about is quite relevant in terms of being, in close proximity to the communities affected and seeing how they can be part of the solution. And that brings us very nicely to transition to a dear friend, Leah Mihari, who is the Director for External Relations and Partnerships at Addis Ababa University. And she's also a lecturer there, teaching international humanitarian law. She founded and has been leading the university IHL clinic since about 5 years ago. And Leah, we're very happy to have you. And I want to again engage you in a series of questions, connecting and moving from what Joshua has discussed about local actors. But I want to move here then, what tools do the local actors use? And some of those tools would be local customs and social norms, which are very powerful. They're a very powerful tool to respond to issues of conflict, to ensure protection of persons affected by armed conflict. And I want you to tell us in a few minutes how traditional customs and other norms serve as a protective force in advancing IHL and in protecting people, and how they can be used to promote sustainable peace from very civilian, societal centered approach.
Thank you so much, Hilary. My apologies. I'm in my seasonal allergy season, so if I cough or if I sneeze during the session, my apologies in advance. But I'm very glad to be here and to be talking about this very important topic. And I'm also glad that Tofik and Joshua already mentioned the importance of encompassing and including local customs when we're talking about humanitarian negotiations or other humanitarian engagements that we have as well. And for me, I would like to pinpoint and talk about traditional customs and norms. And these customs and norms have long served as informal, but like you said, Hilary, very powerful tools for regulating the conduct of hostilities in times of armed conflict and subsequently for bringing sustainable peace in communities, especially in the African context. And in many African societies, war has never been ungoverned. We've always had customs, we've always had norms, we've always had rules that regulate the engagement of the parties to the conflict, wherever they may be. And these rules, although they are unwritten, they mirror the many international humanitarian law principles or rules that we have today within the Geneva Conventions or the additional protocols. And the ICRC has done quite brilliant studies about this, about restraints in war, about the roots of behavior in war in African societies, but also in the Pacific region. And we at the Addis Ababa University International Humanitarian Law Clinic have also produced videos about this traditional customs and norms that was brilliantly narrated by our own Tadele right there. But specifically on when we want to point out the specific norms, for instance, in the Somali region, in the Somali state, our neighbor, they have the Heer system where, which is mediated by the clan elders, and it contains elements that protect women, children, the disabled, the elderly in times of armed conflict. And back in the 90s, the ICRC has done quite a massive study on this, on Somalia particularly. And even the Somali government has said, this is our Geneva Conventions. These are the norms that our people have used since time immemorial during armed conflict situations. And the similar principles have also been found in the Dinka and the Nuer tribes and communities in South Sudan and also in Ethiopia, where community elders act as mediators in intercommunal disputes, intercommunal violence, and ensuring compensation was given for the losses during the conflict. So this helps in ensuring sustainable peace once the conflict is resolved, when the conflict has ended. And these mechanisms not only prevent harm during the conflict, but also heal wounds after the conflict, after the violence. And it's important for us to incorporate these traditions, these norms, these customs in transitional justice systems, in post-conflict frameworks that can help ground IHL in the local customs as well, in ways that people understand. And that is why us at the IHL clinic also work towards enriching and developing and showing this local customs for IHL.
Thank you so much, Leah. So I want to just tie up what you said. You said that local customs are a powerful tool. They relate to IHL. But I'm sure this is not always the case. Maybe you find customs that speak to opposite of what IHL says. I remember, just to give a little anecdote here, when I studied law many, many years ago, I remember that we said that one of the sources of law back in my country, Kenya, was customary law. But this customary law was only relevant if it was not repugnant to justice and morality. And we kept asking ourselves, okay, what is the standard of justice and morality so that you can say this custom is not relevant as a source of law? And I want to just bring this idea to you and ask, so how do you then reconcile situations? Do you have situations where you have IHL norms prescribing one thing and local customs which are deeply entrenched sometimes and people really take them to heart, prescribing something completely different from IHL? How do you reconcile those two and how do you see it?
Yes, that is also the question that we face on a daily basis when we do our work. And the goal that we advocate for is not to replace IHL completely with the customary practices, but to recognize, to integrate, and to enrich the parts of the local customs, the parts of the local systems that complement humanitarian norms. And we believe that this will ultimately create a type of legal pluralism that reinforces both the legitimacy and the compliance of the values that we hold dear during situations of armed conflict. And it should also be noted that many traditional systems, in fact, uphold humanitarian principles of distinction, proportionality, and humanity, even if it's expressed in different forms. But as you said rightly, integration becomes difficult, and it's something that we should always see critically, because there are some practices such as gender exclusion or targeting of specific tribes, everyone within that specific tribe, even little children, because of the type of conflict that exists, and that stands in contradiction with international humanitarian law. And these types of principles within the customs should be reformed, but this can only be done through dialogue. It can't be done through complete erasure or for us to act as if these local customs do not exist, but rather with dialogue with the local customs, with the local customary elders, with the local clan leaders, to make sure that these norms are reformed and not reinforced. And it's especially, Joshua has also talked about the importance of local actors in these engagements, and traditional leaders, as one of the local elders, would always feel sidelined if we refuse to use their customs that have grown organically throughout generations for centuries. If we fail to use them, to address them, to recognize their existence, they will feel sidelined. And that would impact the peace processes or the post-conflict negotiations or even the humanitarian negotiations that we're going to have.
So much, and we're just coming to the end of the discussions from the panelists. But just one last question. From a very practical point of view, how would you see that integration taking place between international legal framework like IHL and local customs, then to create a powerful regime that can contribute to protection of people and contribute to peace building?
To talk about how we can integrate them in actuality, we need to also see the challenges, what could exist as a challenge, because we need to solve those challenges and the barriers. And one of those challenges is the issue of perception, and also something that Tawfiq has raised earlier and very nicely put as legal fatigue, when these laws, international humanitarian law, a law that seems very much Geneva-based, very much Western, is brought in directly and put upon the local communities that have had their own rules, that have had their own traditions since time immemorial, that have grown very much organically, then it would be very difficult to bring those two together, because it creates a sense of gap within the legitimacy of the Geneva Conventions or international humanitarian norms. So one way to do it, and that I've seen different partners doing it during the negotiations, is to show that these local customs, these international humanitarian law rules, reflect the local customs that they have. So that's one way to integrate these two processes. So if we're talking about humanity, or if we're talking about distinction, then we can go to the communities and tell them that distinction of civilian and combatant, civilian and fighters, is very much embedded in the traditional rules and the traditional norms of that community as well. So that's one way to do it. Another challenge is the challenge of substance, which we discussed earlier. Not all of the rules reflect the current day international humanitarian laws that we have and that we hold dearly. So for this would require us to sit down in a panel like this, or under a warka tree, which many of our local communities here in Ethiopia sit under, to discuss, to have dialogue, and to talk about how this norms that we currently consider as harmful practices, or that don't reflect what current day international humanitarian law norms put, how these should be reformulated, how these should be reformed. And this needs to be a conscious and deliberate action. One thing that I've seen, and one thing that we debate about a lot of times when we're talking about this issue, is people asking how these local customs, they may be able to handle daily fights, daily scrabbles between different ethnic groups, but when it comes to full-blown civil wars, non-international armed conflicts, they don't apply because they're not strong enough. And I beg to differ. I argue that they are strong enough, but unlike international humanitarian law that has developed for over a century from the first Geneva Convention in the 1800s to the current Geneva Conventions that we have on hand from the 1949, it has been allowed to grow deliberately, to have been developed deliberately, with people coming together, countries coming together to formulate the rules. And that hasn't been done with our local customs because we've sidelined them either during the colonization processes or during the legal transplantation processes that we have in Ethiopia. So we didn't have the chance to develop them deliberately and consciously, and that needs to be done as well, including with international humanitarian law. And this is where humanitarian actors such as the ICRC, such as Diaconia come into play as well to reinforce and reformulate this as well. And finally, I would also like to mention the political challenges, which is the challenge of legitimacy we have when actors, external actors, including governments, go to the traditional communities, because we have traditional communities where elders or the clan leaders are seen as the most powerful political leaders, and you bring in international actors or local governments coming, you have them coming in and saying what we're saying is right, and trying to sideline the traditional elders. And this would create a legitimacy issue again with the traditional communities who views these traditional leaders as their legitimate leaders as well. So we have to always find a way to work with the local communities, the traditional elders of that communities as well, because without their buy-in, even though what we bring to the table is solid, what we bring to the table is important, it will remain paper-based. And I would finally like to say that for international humanitarian law, at least, to be reconciled and to work together to integrate with international humanitarian law and to integrate with the traditional customs, it must find a place not just on the Geneva Conventions, not just in the laws or on my tablet, but rather in the songs, in the stories, and in the real lives of the local communities as well. Because those are the people that are going out and fighting either as part of the non-state armed groups or as part of the state's military forces as well. Thank you so much, Hilary.
Absolutely wonderful stuff. Thank you so much, Leah, for unpacking that very important subject for us to show that local customs, what I'm sure each of us in our own communities, we know a proverb or a saying or something that actually relates to conduct of hostilities or protection of people. It's just that it's not regarded as IHL, but it is actually something that contributes to IHL. So thank you very much. I think we've had a very rich discussion, and I want now to open the discussion to the panel, and I can see a few hands up, starting with Solomon there, then I will have another hand. So if you could just, of course, Solomon, you don't need to introduce yourself, but if you could just introduce yourself as, and then you ask your question. We'll take a couple of questions. Solomon there, back there.
Thank you very much, Hilary. I'm Solomon Ayelderso from One Africa. Topic, reflecting on your theme on negotiation. Indeed, on a daily basis, in everything that we negotiate, negotiation is part and parcel of living, being human. I would like to bring this to the situation in Sudan, the conflict in Sudan, particularly as it relates to how the conflict in Sudan manifests some of the change that we have seen in how conflicts or hostilities are conducted, including most notably the role of external actors and how external actors' entanglement with conflicts at the national level and the implication that has, particularly when the nature of those external actors is such that they tend to be more transactional and therefore less principle-based. I don't know what kind of experience or engagement you have, interface that ICRC may have with this emerging dynamic here on the African continent, with the heavy, overwhelming involvement of external actors, and what kind of consideration or engagement you have in that respect. And related to the situation in Sudan, once again, from a perspective of particularly non-compliance and total disregard of the norms and principles of IHL, it is one of those current cases that is live that demonstrates the state of affairs that we have. There, international actors, I'd like to be guided by ICRC colleagues. I would imagine, including ICRC, faced enormous obstacles, including in terms of humanitarian space in particular. And the emergency situation rooms that Sudanese innovatively created stepped up to fill in this void that is created by collapse of national infrastructure for protection and by the difficulties that international humanitarian actors faced. And I wonder, this may have happened elsewhere, but I wonder if this experience of the emergency situation rooms experience have kicked in to ask questions by ICRC about its role, but also about the question of localization. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Solomon. There was a question right here, then Ambassador Mona. Then I'll come to this. We'll take 3 questions first. Right here in front, please. So if you could introduce yourself and ask the question.
Thank you so much. My name is Artima Begene. I am an international relations student. So my question is more specific when it comes to gender-based violence in women, when it comes to armed conflicts and especially in non-armed conflicts. So what are the protections holding accountable the sexual violence and ensuring these laws are protected or enforced? Women are, and after that, women are usually left out when it comes to peace talks or negotiations, and their needs are overly looked. So my question is, do you believe international humanitarian law protects women when it comes to these conflicts, especially when it comes to non-international armed conflicts? And also, do you believe international humanitarian law should be reformed in a way that benefits women and inclusive all youths? Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you could just pass the mic to Ambassador Mona. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to the panelists. It was fantastic to listen to you, and it really provoked a lot of thoughts, as we tend to say. Yesterday, in the first day of the Geneva Peace Week meets Addis event, was quite a bit of discussions also around trust in the multilateral system and how can we restore it. And so I'll try to link my comment/question back to that theme and also to what Audrey presented about the global initiative to galvanize again IHL. Knowing and just very describing, just picking 3 elements of maybe the erosion of trust, not only multilateralism, but specifically also in IHL, driven by a few facts or a few elements that we saw in the last few months and years. So for example, countries who have been staunch defendants of IHL now openly thinking about reintroducing or buying ammunitions that are legally prohibited by international law. These are discussions that are happening, triggered by the aggression of a permanent member of the UN Security Council, Russia, against Ukraine. That same triggered also the fact of the ICRC, for example, being publicly criticized again by certain governments who were still maybe, but were predominantly staunch support of the ICRC and IHL, of criticizing the ICRC when you guys dare to say, well, you know, both sides have to respect IHL, not questioning the fact who is the aggressor and who has been aggressed, but the fact that IHL transcends that border and that distinction and has to be applied. Or also the fact that we have also other contexts globally where IHL is being questioned, undermined, and not necessarily by armed groups, but also by, again, governments who were strongly defendants of IHL. So this really, for me, leads very much back to this fantastic initiative by the ICRC with the support of the 6 countries mentioned to really put this back on the table and how we can turn this around. Including, for example, the question that Tufik raised about, you know, how can we ensure that we understand that humanitarian negotiators may have to discuss and we actually have to dialogue and negotiate with actors that we politically can't recognize or don't want to engage. But we need somebody to do that role. And this is also something that has been more intensely criticized in the past. So the question now is, both maybe to Audrey or to Fik and Leah, how can we really build on what has been presented so brilliantly about how do we, for example, tap into the aspect of these principles being locally anchored in customs and traditions as a key element to regain the level of trust and confidence in IHL globally. Is that an avenue that is being discussed, and how can actually through maybe including through the global initiative and the various dialogues happening, not only have discussions with governments and state organizations, but really to bring in also these local actors and really to shape the debate around IHL is not something that has dropped from the sky 75 or 76 years ago, but has a long tradition and is actually by and large a codification of customs and rules and traditions that we've seen around the world, even if it may have not been explicitly mentioned. But if we do the exercise, this might actually also give back the legitimacy and the trust in IHL. And I think this is where, and I appreciate Audrey's point about ensuring that the global initiative is also really anchored and discussed here on the African continent, because this is where we have the legitimacy to move forward the IHL, whereas maybe previous advocates for IHL may have lost a little bit of credibility to do so at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Mona. So one last question from Tigist there, right on the third row, and then we'll have the panels answer those questions. I'm coming to this side after the answers.
Thank you very much, Hilary, and thank you for the panels for the presentation. My question goes to Mr. Tofik. I was very much interested to hear about how challenging it is, you know, in sanction regime doing negotiations. If you really could unpack that a little bit, I mean, if possible, also with examples. Okay, so my question goes to you, of course, when you mentioned a negotiation has been affected by sanction regimes, no, in your presentation. So I just wanted to know a bit more on that, and if you could elaborate a little bit with some examples, if possible. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. So we'll answer those questions first, then we'll come for a second round of questions. So I'll start with Tofik. You have the question from Dr. Solomon on the dynamics in the conflict in Sudan, the international actors, how they are involved, the negotiations there. So please, if you could just unpack that for us from the point of negotiations. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Hilary. Thank you very Solomon, for your comment and questions. I think I will be much more general about the case. I won't go specifically. You talked about ICRC. I don't represent ICRC in this tent, so I will not answer that question. I'll leave my colleagues to discuss about ICRC's experience in Sudan. But in terms of the presence of international actors, I think an important sentence is that negotiation is at all levels, from the checkpoint to the Security Council. You mentioned diplomacy as well, in a way. So these are two tools or two interaction that works together at different levels, and that can be at levels that we don't expect them to be, and they can still be. So you mentioned diplomacy can be at some very grassroots level, like a negotiation can be at the Security Council. Having the interference of international actors, what we consider at CCHN in our methodology, how to analyze the situation for negotiation is, first of all, to make sure that the person you're engaging with is the person making decisions. Is the person for whom the stake is important or what you're going to bring at the table. So if you have international actors that are very involved and they're the one making the decision to a certain extent, probably we're not engaging with the right actor in a way. But we still have to engage in that dialogue to promote, to disseminate, to advocate. But at the same time, I think the bulk of the essence of a negotiation is happening with these international actors. So that means we have to engage at different levels. So if I'm a frontliner in Sudan engaging with the armed groups at the checkpoint or whoever it is, I have also my colleagues that are intervening with these international actors to make sure that we have, first of all, acceptance as a humanitarian organization. And I had a definition that I wanted to share at some moment, but just to tell you that humanitarian negotiation goes through acceptance, and acceptance is a mother of all access, and from access to the implementation. So these are three levels, and the acceptance is at the political level, basically, where that doesn't mean political figures. That means where we are engaging in making acceptance on our values, identities, and etc. So we have to make sure that these international actors having a strong influence on the ground have to accept as well who we are and what we are here to do. So that's how we put it in this sense, so that we are engaging at all levels. And if there are over interference, we have to engage in this as well and negotiate for better access. I think I was too long.
Mike, maybe you can just touch on the questions on sanctions regime and how that affects the negotiations.
Okay. Yeah. So on your question, very shortly, on sanction regimes. So I think the problem is for us to operate as humanitarian actors on the ground. So basically, it's very connected as well to bureaucratic impediment as well, to a certain extent. So when you have sanctions, you have things that you cannot bring. You have things that you cannot do as a humanitarian organization to bring them to that country. So that might be affecting the engagement you will have with your counterpart in this sense.
Thank you so much. So, Joshua, I want you to take the question on the gender-based violence and the protection of women, and whether IHL needs to be reformed to protect women more.
That's a very good question, because I've just finished writing an article on it, which I hope will be published soon. So I'm hoping that it's something that you look out for in the near future with the review of the Red Cross. But anyway, I think for me it is to take a step back, and as an international humanitarian law practitioner, I'm really honest about the limitations of IHL and some of the challenges that IHL faces. IHL, of course, is a law that was written, many years ago. It still has the shackles of a very patriarchal, a very, heavily Western, white, centralized system. A lot of, the bulk of the Geneva Conventions were written even before you had a number of African states achieve their independence, so largely by Western states. So you have a lot of aspects that honestly we need to be, as IHL practitioners, honest about the limitations, honest about the challenges that IHL itself intrinsically possesses. And I think that's one thing. And also that can help us hopefully address some of the other questions that have come forward. And I think gender-based violence is one of those areas. I think IHL, of course, once you study a lot of the provisions, for example, in the Geneva Conventions on the protection of women or on the protection of females, you find that a lot of them are steeped in a very patriarchal understanding of the role of women in society. There's certain challenges around laws being constructed around, whether women, can give birth or of childbearing age, or if they're pregnant, or about protection of their honor, or about, so very, very interesting notions about women, which very clearly have been overtaken by time. So of course, IHL in itself has a lot of reimagining that it has to go through in order for it to be even more protective. And I would like to propose that some of the challenges we face in the area of conflict-related sexual violence is because of some of those challenges of the IHL framework. But it does protect women against sexual violence. I mean, it has evolved, and a lot of it has evolved in customary IHL to provide better protections. But definitely, I think the legal frameworks, the treaties, a lot of those would need serious revisiting and reimagining in order for them to be even more protective. And you speak about women, but again, IHL is quite limited because we speak about a broader spectrum of people within the context of armed conflict that experience harm. So you're looking at, you're looking at boys, you're looking at sexual violence against men in the context of armed conflict. And so there's a spectrum of persons who are vulnerable in the context of armed conflict. And I think this conversation about gender-based violence needs to be opened up, and there need to be honest conversations about it.
Thank you, Joshua, for the answer. And now just coming to the end of the answers, and I want to turn to Leah to just reflect on Ambassador Mona's reflection and the question of integrating these customs into IHL. The question, of course, that we face of IHL facing a backlash and a difficult multilateralism environment. And I also want to ask Audrey to say something about that. And if you could just make your intervention brief so that we can take another round of questions, please.
Thank you very much for that question, Your Excellency, Ambassador Mona. I think that question goes to the heart of the challenges we see in multilateralism and any international forum that we have today. The question of belongingness, especially taking a very strong stand within those challenges of multilateralism. And many African states and many African communities have long been asking, particularly within the field of IHL as well, how during the formulation of the Geneva Conventions, the additional protocols, they have been sidelined in one way or the other. When the first Geneva Convention were coming out, it was right about the time where the scramble for Africa was happening. So right during colonization, and particularly during the scramble season, and it was at that time, it was not believed, but it was understood that IHL did not apply to the less civilized Africans whose land is being colonized, whose land is being taken into action. And subsequently, much work has been done to develop IHL to also make sure that it's quite inclusive. But now, with all of the questions and challenges, again, on multilateralism and on the various laws and treaties that we've had, it's high time that we use all of the tools in our arsenal and we focus all of our energy in the dissemination of IHL as well. And we have to do that in whatever form that we have on hand, be it with teaching it alongside local customs or religious values, because as you clearly see, we may not see the actual wars themselves here in Addis Ababa, but we do feel the effects of the various wars, not just in the country, the conflicts not just in the country, but also around the continent. And it's high time that we use all of the tools in our arsenal towards IHL dissemination, towards IHL education, because without that, the atrocities that we see are only going to be increasing and not decreasing in any way.
Thank you, Leah. And now, Audrey, lastly, just to address the question of what I would call IHL clawbacks, where we are seeing norms that have been agreed upon, sometimes being questioned, or countries discussing about withdrawal of certain important treaties, and how should such a challenge be addressed? Audrey, if you can hear me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Hilary, and thank you for the questions. If you allow me, I'll also answer the question on gender-based violence, even though Joshua gave a very comprehensive response. But just very quickly, does IHL adequately protect women on paper? Yes, IHL provides a strong legal framework through the Geneva Conventions, its additional protocol, and as Joshua mentioned, through customary international law, which really reinforces the absolute prohibition of sexual violence in armed conflict. But then in practice, of course, there's the implementation is inconsistent, and there's enforcement gaps that remain. And I completely agree that IHL was developed in a very male-dominated context, often treating women as a passive victim rather than an agent per se. So I think for me, it's rather than an overall, we need to really have and bring stronger gender-sensitive interpretation and application of existing norms. We also need to improve training for armed actors and humanitarian negotiators to ensure that they actually bring those components in the discussions that they have. We also need to include women in peace processes and mediation to shift power dynamics. And finally, we need to bring survivor-centered approaches in responses and accountability mechanisms. So those are my 2 cents on that question. And on the second question on how the global initiative can restore credibility and trust in IHL, it's a big ask, of course. But I totally agree that we need to include civil society as voices and field-based practitioners into the conversation. And that's why under the IHL and Peace workstream, what we've tried to do is really to have 3 types of events per consultation. One of them is a high-level expert panel discussion, and that's where we inject voices from the field and voices from the civil society that work directly with those grassroots organizations and help us bring back this information to the discussion, and then we address these questions specifically to states during the 2 other subsequent events, which are the closed door state roundtable and then the all-state online consultation. And finally, just to say maybe that this year, the 3rd consultation will be on transitional justice. Ethiopia being one of the co-chair, we will hopefully organize an event with the state's participation. And I think this will be a really good opportunity as well during this consultation to bring the voices of grassroots organization, of victims, and show that, you know, there is this parallel and intertwine between local norms and IHL. Thank you. And with this, sorry, I'll have to go to our next event. So I wanted to thank you very much for giving me the space, and I hope to stay connected. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Thank you, thank you. So now we'll take another, the last round of questions. I know our time is up, but if you indulge me for 10 minutes. So if you could just please keep the questions short and also the interventions short. So the second round of questions will start right here in front. If you can have the mic right here in front, first row, please. Right here.
Thank you very much. My name is Nizha Alawi Mhamdi. I'm the ambassador of Morocco here in Ethiopia. I would like, first of all, to thank the organizers for gathering us in this week to talk about very important topics, and especially the Embassy of Switzerland for inviting us. I would like also to thank all the panelists for the very insightful contribution and reflection they brought to us today. I have 2 questions. The first one, unfortunately, was for Dr. Audrey, and the second one is for Dr. Joshua, but I think that Dr. Joshua might enlighten me and help me to get some answers. My first question is about the R2P concept or principle. As we are going to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the R2P next September 2025, do we have to expect an updated definition of this principle or concept in order to make it more operational around the world? That is the first question. The second question is about the Mozambique situations. You very rightly said that within the customs, and the traditional and local actors, you engage with the religious leaders. We know that the Cabo Delgado conflict in the northern part of Mozambique has been created or sparkled because of social and economic grievances but also because the Shabab at that time criticized strongly the legitimacy of the religious leaders, because they found them not that, vocal to address economic and social grievances of the local population of Cabo Delgado. So my question is as follows. What are the challenges that you faced to identify and then to engage with the religious leaders that can be vocal and that can have also an effective contribution on the dialogue to make social peace in Cabo Delgado? Thank you very much.
One more question? Back there? Right there. In front? It's there. Right.
Thank you very much. I'm Ali Dao from UNESCO. I would like to thank ICRC and the panelists. My question is, what is the material that you use, all of you, to facilitate, to engage dialogue with, as you call, local community? I'm not comfortable with this calling because they are, for sure, the owner of the land. Local comparing to who? Because they have their role to play. You bring some foreign thing to their community, and they never understand what happened. If you look at very well, what is the factor of the war? You must thinking about that, because the problem is very deep. That's why if you look at very well, there's some factors. You see, okay, it is poverty. But who created the poverty? Poverty is the first violation for human rights. I understand myself. Look at the farmer, the coffee producer. They never engage to fix the price of the coffee. But we never evaluate their effort. And I want to come to them to say, okay, unemployment for youth, poverty, or the factors of the war, but you need to go to ask what happened. I'm from Mali. You have a lot of traditional mechanisms to manage conflict. Go to ask all the manuscripts from Timbuktu, even in Ethiopia here. I'm sure that in the room, some of us never been in the museum to go to see what was the system of management of conflict in Africa, in different countries in Africa. And thing must be very careful that the word that we use each different community to facilitate and to manage the conflict. Because it's time now to see how it is this way that African people must wake up from Algeria to South Africa. In each country, we're intending the war somewhere. What is the problem? That is the question. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hillary. My name is Meiron. I'm from the Addis Ababa University IHL Clinic and Master of Laws candidate in Public International Law. So my question could be directed to any one of the panelists, but maybe especially to Ms. Magdalite or Ms. Leah, because it's directly relevant to Ethiopia. So I wanted to ask about non-international armed conflicts, because it's very much relevant to modern conflicts. So we know that armed groups, non-international armed groups or non-state actors usually tend to not follow international humanitarian law. So how can we, especially in the Ethiopian case, how can we reconcile those traditional customs with IHL principles when non-state actors are involved? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. So we'll take answers to those questions and then close the session. So we'll start with Joshua. There are two questions for you from the ambassador.
Thank you very much. I'll maybe start with the last one, because I think it speaks more to the work that we're doing in the region. And that's a very good question. There is a sense in which religion has a role to play in the conflict in Cabo Delgado. And I would like to suggest it's actually a religious narrative that hijacked actually real local issues around economic stability, around disparities between the north and the south in terms of economic development, about a sense in which the northern part of Mozambique felt, in a sense, left out from a lot of the economic strides that were happening in Mozambique, and of course with the discovery of oil in that area, that further exacerbated the problem. And of course, this then, as an issue, was then, of course, I could say, taken on by religious extremist groups that then took on this issue, filled a void, as you rightly say, that was left behind because this issue was not being adequately addressed. And so, yes, at the heart of this conflict definitely is a big religious question around how do you grapple with dealing with these real society and community issues. And for us, what we have seen is the need to identify interfaith platforms. And so the ones that I have been speaking about, for example, what we call the peace clubs, are actually interfaith platforms that have been established. Yes, you have the Anglican Church involved in it, but you also have members from the Muslim council, as well as the Muslim leadership within the country. Now, of course, that is different from the militants who are fighting, so of course that distinction has to be made. But we have to start somewhere, and what we've realized is that there is good opportunity in interfaith platforms, because interfaith platforms allow the different categorizations of both faith leaders and thought leaders to be able to push their different constituencies for peace. And so for me, the quick answer I can say is engaging with the interfaith platforms and trying to move away from a singular engagement with just different religious entities or religious groups. And we're waiting to see how that plays out. It's not a silver bullet, I must say, but we've realized that in a sense is one of the best ways in terms of having a much more robust impact on both the conflict but also in the peace building phase. The R2P actually is a really good question, and I think we could go into a lot of what R2P seeks to prevent, genocide, and what we're seeing around the world right now. And there are really serious questions around whether this framework is actually effective, or if it's actually being engaged, or when some states try to engage it, what happens to them, what repercussions they face. And so I think that's an honest question that is very difficult for me to answer. I don't have the answer to that. I think we have a wider context to that question about what I could call the collapse of multilateralism, the collapse of a multilateral system. And where you have a collapsing multilateral system, it's very difficult for some of these initiatives to thrive. So I think there's a lot of soul searching that needs to be done in the international community for us to be able to see a lot of these initiatives actually have an impact. So I guess my quick answer to you is that it's very difficult, and I honestly am also struggling with it. Thank you.
If you could just give the mic to our speaker to answer the question of how to reconcile African traditions in IHL to use them as a tool for sustainable peace.
I think, thank you for the question. I think it's highly related with the practical aspect of IHL. So just to give the government a perspective on this, government is open for any initiative, like facilitate the initiatives from the local side and also from the humanitarian agencies. So it's more like paving the way for a more coordinated effort from both sides. I think it's highly related with the practical aspect. So maybe I'll pass it with Ms. Leah.
Thank you. Leah, do you want to add something in 30 seconds?
I wanted to add, but...
So I would like to to answer both questions in 30 seconds or less. The first is from our colleague, particularly on the basic question, on the question of local customs and how to integrate them. And I think whenever we think about that, we always have to go back to the basic issue. What do our communities want? How do our communities base their lives? And it has always been humanity and community. The idea has always been, how do we live together as a community? How do we support each other as a community? So even in times of conflicts, what is always seen is how can we continue to live in harmony after this conflict is over? And this is also what is reflected in the various rules on rules during conflicts in African communities. And this has been seen in Timbuktu. Studies have been done on the Dinka, the Nuer tribes in South Sudan and Ethiopia, in Somalia, and in Ethiopia within the Oromo people, the Gada system of the Oromo people. Everything is what it shows how the community aspires to live together in harmony. And I would like to give one example of how this applies in conflict settings. So in Uganda, after the conflict with the LRA, alongside the IHL processes and the peace processes, one of the things that was used was where's my example? Yes. It was the traditional rituals that were centered on forgiveness, on compensation, and on community dialogue and restitution. And this did not displace international humanitarian law, but it reinforced the communal way of living, and it reinforced the harmony that was needed and they were seeking after the conflict was over. Because at the end of the day, we live next to the soldier, we live next to the perpetrator, whomever that may be. And that life will have to continue one way or the other. So that's something we should always see in transitional justice process. If I have 10 more seconds, I will address Meron's question. Be it with non-state armed groups or state armed forces, IHL is oftentimes more respected than it is violated. But whenever it is violated, it always makes the news, it always appears on the media, and those violations are so severe, are so aggressive that we can never cancel the images out of our heads. But IHL is not always violated. So we must focus on the times that it has been respected, the best practices, and ICRC does this best with the IHL in Focus project that they have, where they outline the respect of IHL as well. Because we don't want it to seem as if IHL imposes rules that are difficult to respect during armed conflicts, because it's not. These are the most fundamental rules, the most fundamental guarantees to humanity that we have. Thank you very much, Hilary.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for the panelists. So that brings us yeah? Okay, please, 10 seconds.
10 seconds. One of the interesting things about a lot of our customary norms and practices is I think there's also an opportunity that we miss in terms of IHL being refined and actually being polished by some of the practices that we have and some of the notions that have permeated our societies for a long time. So I think there's both an opportunity for local customs, but also an opportunity for the reimagining of IHL.
Thank you so much, Joshua. So with that, we come close to our panel discussion this afternoon. And I would like to thank everybody who's been involved in this. Of course, our panelists, Leah, Tufik, Joshua, and Melkadowit. Thank you very much. And also to thank the organizers, Amani Africa, Geneva Platform, Swiss Embassy, and special thanks go to Ambassador Mona for really supporting this. I think it's a very, very important dialogue. And just to mention something, we've really reflected on IHL and its role in peace building. Just last year, we had the 75th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions, and we had a very candid reflection of the status of the law and the status of world affairs. And from that, Amani Africa published a very interesting analysis of this reflection, hot from the press, I think released yesterday. And we have a QR code, which was, I think it will be displayed there. So if you scan this, technology really makes our life easy. If you scan that QR code, you will get the article, and you can see the reflection that Amani Africa did for IHL 75th anniversary, and happy reading. Otherwise, thank you very, very much, and do enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.